I was a hopeless romantic about to propose to the manipulative campus queen in college. But the moment I dropped to one knee, I was suddenly transported 5 years into the future. A 4-year-old boy who looked just like me came running up to call me dad, and I found myself living in a lavish penthouse in the heart of Manhattan. When I finally managed to piece together the shredded wedding photos hidden in a drawer, I was stunned to realize that my legal wife was not the girl from college. It was actually Olivia Montgomery, my gorgeous childhood friend whom I had secretly loved for years, but always thought was out of my league. It turned out that over the past 5 years, I had been acting like a total idiot, treating my perfect wife with cold indifference and constantly demanding a divorce. One second, I was about to ask the prettiest girl in school to marry me. In the blink of an eye, I had been catapulted 5 years into the future. Even my own son was already 4 years old. I could not help but feel a sense of triumph, assuming my proposal had been a total success. However, that feeling vanished when I stumbled upon several wedding photos. The pictures had been shredded into tiny pieces and carelessly shoved into the corner of a drawer. As I patiently taped the fragments back together, I was shocked to see that my wife was not the girl I had been obsessed with in college. It was Olivia. Just moments before this, I had been drowning in a wave of nervous excitement. I was standing there, ready to propose to the campus goddess, Tiffany Miller. I held a bouquet of flowers and dropped to one knee with a thud. I held my breath, waiting for her to say yes. Then, in an instant, everything changed. I opened my eyes in a luxurious penthouse in the middle of Manhattan. I stared blankly at the high-end decor and the sophisticated furniture surrounding me. I felt the smooth texture of the silk pajamas I was wearing. I ran my hand over the expensive silk sheets beneath me. My mind was a complete blur, and I had no idea what was happening. Before I could even begin to process the situation, the bedroom door flew open. The bedroom door swung open with a loud bang. A little boy rushed in like a tiny cannonball. His features were remarkably similar to mine, though he was far more adorable than I ever was. The little guy scrambled onto the bed and threw his arms around my neck. He shouted that I had finally opened my eyes. He told me that I had been fast asleep for 2 whole days. He begged me to get out of bed and play games with him. I stared at the little munchkin in total disbelief. I actually had a son, but I had no idea who the mother was. I vividly remembered holding out a ring to Tiffany just a moment ago. Did I actually win her over in the end? Did I really marry Tiffany and start a family with her? I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm. I gently moved the clinging child to the side and spoke tentatively. I told him that I was still feeling a bit under the weather. I asked where his mother was. The boy replied that she was away on a business trip. He mentioned that she had already been gone for several days. I was trying to figure out how to squeeze more information about his mother out of him. Suddenly, a woman who looked like a nanny pushed the door open and interrupted us. She apologized profusely for the intrusion. She told me she would take the young master out of the room immediately. The nanny quickly took the boy by the hand and spoke in a soothing voice. She reminded little Ethan that he still hadn't finished the schoolwork his mother had assigned him. She asked him if they should go finish his tasks now. Ethan agreed, saying that he loved his mother more than anyone. He added that he certainly didn't want to make her upset. He told me he was going to be a good boy and study. He promised to come back and play with me later. After saying that, the little guy obediently followed the nanny out of the room. Once the two of them had left the room, I scrambled out of bed. I immediately began rummaging through every drawer and cabinet in the place. I was desperate to find any clues that could explain my current situation. I opened a massive wardrobe and found rows of perfectly ironed clothes. The women's clothing was on the left and the men's was on the right, separated by a very distinct line. The styles and colors of the men's clothing were exactly what I liked. They matched my personal taste perfectly. I then turned and walked into the master bathroom. 2 sets of toiletries, one for a man and one for a woman, were arranged neatly on the vanity. It seemed like my wife and I had a very loving relationship. Even the toothbrush holders and cups were matching couple sets. I pulled open a few more drawers and found various undergarments. There were socks for me and intimate apparel for my wife. When I glanced at the sizes of her lingerie, I couldn't help but feel a surge of private excitement. It appeared that the wife I hadn't met yet had a stunning figure. I practically turned the room upside down, but I still couldn't find any substantial evidence of her identity. Every single decoration and item in the house seemed to be chosen according to my specific preferences. Despite everything looking perfect, I had a nagging feeling that something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on what was wrong. I turned around, feeling increasingly frustrated. Suddenly, I noticed a flickering light coming from beneath the pillow. I lifted it up and discovered a smartphone. The model was completely unfamiliar to me. It was a brand I had never even heard of before. I tried swiping the screen, and it immediately unlocked using facial recognition. There was no doubt about it. This was definitely my phone. As I started scrolling through the content, that sense of unease returned. It seemed as though I hadn't made any friends over the past few years. My social circle appeared to be incredibly small. My messaging apps were dead silent, with not a single person reaching out for a chat. My contact list was pathetic, containing only about 15 names, none of whom had been active recently. I couldn't find any useful information in my text messages either. The screen was filled with nothing but meaningless system notifications. Even the call history was completely blank. Right then, I caught sight of a very familiar name. It was my best friend, Jerry Dawson. He was the kind of guy who was always quoting philosophy and trying to sound smarter than he was. Everyone used to call him JD for short. He was my ride-or-die friend since childhood. We were so close that we practically shared everything growing up. He was the kind of friend you could trust with your life during a high-stakes video game match. Without hesitation, I dialed his number. To my surprise, he didn't just ignore it, he actually hung up on me. I stood there in shock. I wondered if our friendship had completely fallen apart during those missing 5 years. I refused to accept it and stubbornly called him back over and over again. I bombarded his phone with calls. Finally, just as I was about to give up out of frustration, he picked up. He immediately screamed, asking how I had the nerve to call him. He asked me what kind of episode 1 was having this time. He told me that if my brain was broken, I should check myself into a psychiatric ward. He shouted at me to stop bothering him with my nonsense. He reminded me that he wasn't my personal nanny. I was so startled that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I had to admit, the call quality on this new phone was incredibly sharp. Jerry's furious shouting boomed through the speaker. It was so loud it felt like it was in surround sound. The noise was intense enough to make my eardrums ache. I was completely stunned by the verbal assault. I had no idea what was going on. He was acting like a short fuse that had just been lit. Despite his overwhelming rage, I forced myself to speak. I told him that something huge had happened to me. I explained that it was too complicated to talk about over the phone. I asked him if he could come over to my place. He asked what kind of new game I was trying to play. He mockingly asked if I'd stopped being crazy and started role-playing instead. He made it very clear where he stood. He told me that he wasn't my long-suffering wife. He wasn't going to put up with my toxic behavior anymore. He told me to get lost and stay away. I shouted back that I was in serious trouble this time. I told him my head was spinning and I couldn't remember anything. I was as anxious as a cat on a hot tin roof and started rambling incoherently. He asked if I was planning to go behind everyone's back to see Tiffany again. He reminded me that he had warned me about her being a shallow and unfaithful woman. He asked me why I kept acting so pathetic. He pleaded with me to just focus on the stable life I already had. It shocked me that Jerry knew all about Tiffany from my college days. We hadn't even attended the same university back then. I had never even mentioned her name to him once. I had been terrified that if my proposal failed, he would never let me hear the end of it. Now, not only did he know who she was, but he seemed to know everything about her. Clearly, a lot had happened in those 5 years that I was completely unaware of. The most important takeaway from his rant was the realization that Tiffany was definitely not my wife. So who exactly was I married to? I looked around the spacious bedroom once more. Then it finally clicked, and I understood where that strange sense of wrongness was coming from. There wasn't a single photograph in the entire room. There were no romantic wedding pictures and no sweet snapshots of daily life. There wasn't even a single portrait of anyone. The place was completely bare of personal memories. While I didn't say anything for a long time, Jerry seemed to realize something was wrong. He continued to mumble some insults under his breath. I couldn't focus on anything he was saying anymore. Only one question was burning in my mind, which was who I had actually married. I can't even remember which one of us ended the call. While my mind was racing with wild theories, there was a knock at the door. I told them to come in. A woman who appeared to be the housekeeper opened the door. She spoke in a very cautious tone, as if she were afraid of upsetting me. She asked if I wanted something to eat. She mentioned that I hadn't had a single bite of food in 2 days. As soon as she said that, my stomach let out a loud and perfectly timed growl. I told her to bring the food in. To be honest, I was so confused that I didn't think I had an appetite. However, my body was clearly on the verge of collapsing from hunger. A short while later, the housekeeper returned with several beautifully prepared dishes. It was a perfect balance of meat and vegetables. The meal looked incredibly nutritious and healthy. The presentation was so meticulous that it looked like a work of art. She rolled the food in on a fancy silver service card. The most shocking part was that every single dish was something I absolutely loved. Judging by the lifestyle, I must have been living very comfortably over the last few years. The house had both a dedicated nanny for the child and a housekeeper for the chores. I began to eat heartily while trying to plan my next move. I needed to figure out a way to learn about my life without raising any suspicion. Just then, the door opened again and my son, Ethan, came bouncing back into the room. He cheered that I was finally out of bed and eating. He said his mother would be so happy to hear the news. Since he brought her up, I decided to casually ask him more about her. I asked him exactly where his mother had gone for her business trip. He looked at me and said she was away for work. He reminded me that he had already told me that earlier. He added that she promised to bring him a gift when she returned. I asked if she had mentioned when she would be home. He said he wasn't sure, but she had mentioned being away for 2 weeks. He admitted that he didn't know how to count how long 2 weeks actually was. I watched him as he wrinkled his little forehead in concentration, looking absolutely adorable. I kept gently probing for more details and asked him how old he was. He told me he was 3 but would be turning 4 very soon. He insisted that I should treat him like a big boy now. I told him how impressive that was. I praised him for being so smart at such a young age. Then, I told him I wanted to give him a little test. I asked him where all the photos of his mother and me were kept. He started to say that I had already done something to them, but the nanny suddenly rushed back in. She cut Ethan off before he could finish his sentence. She apologized again and said it was her fault for letting the little master wander back in. She told me she would take him away immediately. Both of these women had been acting very strange toward me from the start. They were extremely respectful, but there was a clear underlying tone of fear. I could understand why they would respect me as their employer. I assumed I probably paid them a very generous salary, but the fear was confusing. I wondered why they were so afraid of me. Was I really that difficult to work for? I wondered if I had a temper like a ticking time bomb. After finishing my meal, I wandered around the upper floor again, but still found no useful clues. I heard some noise coming from downstairs and decided to head down the staircase. I found my son, Ethan, lying on the rug, working on a Lego set. His tiny hands were struggling to snap the pieces together. He couldn't get the smaller pieces to click into place. However, the little guy was surprisingly stubborn and independent. He kept trying until his small hands turned bright red. He gritted his teeth and refused to ask anyone for help. I realized that such a strong sense of independence was either natural or a result of his home environment. When I thought back to how he burst into my bedroom earlier, he seemed so cheerful and energetic. It was strange that he was now so hesitant to ask an adult for assistance. The reason why he was forcing himself to be so independent was becoming painfully obvious. I looked at myself and realized that I was probably the one to blame. I saw beads of sweat forming on his forehead from the effort. His little face was flushed and covered in sweat. My heart ached for him, and I quickly walked over to his side. I exclaimed that he was doing an incredible job. I asked him if he had built the whole thing by himself. He proudly said yes. It turned out that a 4-year-old is very easy to win over with a little bit of praise. He was absolutely beaming with joy. I asked if I could join him and play together. I told him that I had never played with such a massive Lego set before. He happily agreed and started dancing around with excitement. He probably couldn't figure out why his usually cold father had suddenly become so friendly. But no one would ever complain about someone becoming a better person. He clearly preferred this new, approachable version of me. We spent some time building the set together. The nanny eventually came back downstairs. She informed me that it was time for Ethan's scheduled lessons. She said she was going to take him to his study area. I told her to go ahead. The timing was actually perfect because the little guy was starting to get a bit frustrated with the blocks. A change of pace would be good for him. Just as he was about to leave with the nanny, he suddenly turned around. He lunged into my arms and gave me a tight hug. He told me that he liked me much better this way. He begged me never to go back to being the robot dad I used to be. He said that the old version of me didn't even know how to smile. My heart sank when I heard those words. I wondered if I really had been such a monster to my wife and child. In my own memory, I was always a happy and outgoing guy. It seemed like Jerry was right about me after all. I must have really lost my mind over the past few years. Just then, as if on cue, my friend actually showed up. Despite all the nasty things Jerry had said to me on the phone, he couldn't stay away. He had threatened to leave me to my own devices and said he would never believe another word I said. But deep down, he still cared about our friendship. Not long after he hung up, he arrived at my front door. I watched as a man in a sharp business suit walked into the room. He was wearing gold-rimmed glasses and gave off the vibe of a highly successful professional. There wasn't a single trace left of the scruffy kid I used to know. I wondered if this was really the same messy Jerry I grew up with. Had he actually become a successful businessman in the last 5 years? Or had he finally given in and gone home to inherit his family's fortune? I walked up to him and gave his shoulder a friendly punch like I used to. I told him he looked impressively sharp and professional now. I joked that he must have made a killing in the business world. Jerry stared at me as if I were some kind of alien. He asked if I had actually changed my personality for real this time. Fearing another verbal explosion, I quickly dragged him toward the stairs. The housekeeper looked absolutely shocked as she watched us. I practically dragged him into the master bedroom and slammed the door. I made sure to lock it behind us. I told Jerry that I wasn't the man he thought I was. I explained that I was actually the version of myself from 5 years ago. I admitted that I had no idea how I ended up in this future. I explained that I had only just arrived in this timeline. As I continued my incoherent rambling, Jerry's brow furrowed into a tight knot of confusion. Jerry told me he didn't drive all the way here just to listen to me speak in riddles. I insisted that I wasn't joking. I told him that I had literally been transported here from the day of our college graduation. I told him I had absolutely no memory of anything that happened in between. Jerry's frown deepened even further. It was obvious that he didn't believe a single word of my ridiculous story. He clearly didn't think such a bizarre thing was possible in the real world. He asked what kind of stunt I was trying to pull this time. He reminded me how devoted and caring Olivia was as a wife. He pointed out how sweet and well-behaved little Ethan was. He said everyone could see it except for me. He begged me to just settle down and live a normal life for once. He told me to stop all the pointless drama. I felt like I had been struck by lightning. I couldn't believe that I was actually married to Olivia, the girl I had worshipped in secret. I was stunned to realize that Ethan was actually our biological son. Seeing the look of absolute shock on my face, Jerry finally began to reconsider. He asked me what was really going on. This time, his voice wasn't filled with skepticism. Instead, I could hear a genuine note of concern in his tone. It took me a moment to find my voice. I gave Jerry a bitter smile and shrugged my shoulders. I told him that just a moment ago, I had been in the middle of proposing to Tiffany. I explained that I had just knelt down and handed her the bouquet. I hadn't even heard her response yet. Then, in the next second, I woke up right here in this apartment. Suddenly, I found myself with a wife and a child. At that moment, Jerry finally started to believe me. He knew that for the current me, Tiffany's name was a massive trigger. In the past few years, her name had been like a landmine that would set me off instantly. If anyone had dared to mention Tiffany in front of me recently, I would have completely lost my cool. Seeing me so calm while talking about her was proof enough for him. Jerry, a grown man, actually started to tear up. I realized that we were both approaching middle age now. The sight of two grown men crying in each other's arms was pretty embarrassing to imagine. I tried to push him away, but he was surprisingly heavy and wouldn't budge. I eventually gave up and let him have his cry. Between his sobs, he kept calling me a complete idiot. He slowly started to explain everything that had happened over the last few years. That was when I learned that I really had been mentally unstable for a while. I had actually spent some time in a psychiatric hospital. It turned out that all the insults he hurled at me on the phone were based on the truth. He told me that on the day of the proposal, Tiffany actually did say yes. When I handed her the flowers and the necklace, she accepted them immediately. However, she had always dreamed of becoming a famous star overnight. She only agreed to marry me because she thought I was a wealthy heir with more money than brains. She figured I would be an easy target to manipulate. She was simply using me as a stepping stone to launch her career in the entertainment industry. Not long after, she shamelessly took the money my parents had set aside for our wedding. She spent every cent on fake followers and social media engagement to boost her profile. She managed to turn herself into a minor online influencer. Then, she used that momentum to try and break into acting. She went to countless auditions, but failed every single one of them. In a desperate move, she ended up sleeping with the assistant director of a popular television show. That was how she landed a tiny, insignificant role. Unfortunately for her, the show was scrapped before it could even air because the lead actor was involved in a drug scandal. The whole project was permanently shelved. To secure more opportunities, she continued her secret affair with that assistant director behind my back. As her fame grew, she became terrified that her past would be exposed. She eventually dumped me without a second thought. But back then, I was so blinded by my feelings that I refused to let her go. I even caught the two of them together in bed once. Even then, I continued to live in denial and made up excuses for her behavior. I practically brainwashed myself into believing her lies. I convinced myself that she was the victim. I had stubbornly believed that the sleazy, bald director must have used some horrible tactics to force her into it. After hearing this ridiculous story, I finally understood why everyone had been so fed up with me. With my pathetic and obsessive behavior, it was a miracle I was still functioning. I asked Jerry how on earth I ended up married to Olivia after all that. Olivia was my childhood friend, and along with Jerry, we had all grown up in the same neighborhood. But Olivia was always the golden child that every parent compared their kids to. She was perfect in every way. Whether it was dancing, painting, or playing the piano, she excelled at everything she tried. Her academic performance was so high that it made everyone else look bad. All the kids in our neighborhood grew up in her shadow. Our parents constantly compared us to her, which usually led to us getting in trouble. It was impossible to compete with someone who got perfect scores on every test without even trying. She was adorable and always knew the right thing to say, making it impossible not to like her. Having such a brilliant child constantly around us was like living in a shadow for those of us who struggled in school. I had to admit that as we got older and reached our teenage years, things changed. Olivia naturally became the girl that every guy dreamed about, the unattainable first love of our neighborhood. Even I spent countless nights lying awake, secretly wishing that she could be my girlfriend. But there were so many guys after her, and almost all of them were more impressive than I was. My deep feelings of insecurity forced me to keep my crush a secret. I played the role of the protective older brother to stay close to her. I even helped her fend off all the other guys who tried to hit on her. I still vividly remember the massive bridge I burned with my family, just so I could marry Tiffany. My parents were completely against the idea from the start. After Tiffany dumped me, I became the laughingstock of the entire family. In the end, it was Olivia who saved me. I still don't know how she did it, but she managed to convince my parents to let me work at her company. I was at the lowest point of my life, spending my days drinking myself into a stupor. Olivia never left my side, staying up late to talk me through my depression. One night, I got completely wasted and mistook her for Tiffany. In my drunken confusion, I forced a kiss on her. Shortly after that, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. You two had a shotgun wedding. I heard her father almost beat you to death when he found out. If Olivia hadn't stepped in to stop him, you probably would have met your maker that day." Listening to Jerry's story made me feel like my heart was on a wild roller coaster ride. I rubbed my nose and gave a forced laugh, asking him if I had been a total piece of work lately. He told me that calling me a piece of work was a huge understatement. He said I hadn't even been acting like a decent human being. He couldn't believe that despite having a beautiful family, I was still demanding a divorce every single day. I was absolutely floored. I had finally married the girl of my dreams and had a wonderful son. I couldn't understand what was wrong with me to want to throw all that away. He asked me how I had the nerve to ask why. He said that everyone else was wondering what was wrong with my head. He couldn't grasp why I wouldn't just enjoy the good life I had. He yelled that I was obsessed with Tiffany and her sleazy director boyfriend. He asked if I'd been kicked in the head by a mule. Eventually, Olivia was the one who realized I needed professional help. She forced me to go to the hospital for a full evaluation. I felt a chill run down my spine and nervously asked if I actually had a mental illness. He told me it wasn't exactly that. He explained that the doctors diagnosed me with depression and occasional manic episodes. He noted that I seemed remarkably normal at this very moment. I asked him to try and see things from my perspective. He said that since I was the version of myself from 5 years ago, it might actually be a good thing. He told me that since I hadn't lived through the mess of the last few years, I could start fresh. He urged me to treat Olivia and Ethan with the love they deserved. He said that having a happy life was more important than anything else. I don't even remember when Jerry finally left because I was so consumed by guilt. I realized that I had been a complete scumbag. I had constantly screamed at Olivia and smashed things just to let out my anger. I had even been emotionally distant and cold toward Ethan for a long time. I couldn't fathom how I could be so cruel to such a sweet and innocent child. I was desperate to make things right and find some kind of redemption. I started subtly asking the nanny and the housekeeper questions about Olivia and Ethan. I want to know everything from their favorite hobbies to their daily routines. I asked about their personalities and how their moods shifted throughout the day. I wanted to understand every little detail about them. I volunteered to take over the responsibility of dropping Ethan off and picking him up from school. His preschool was a prestigious private international school located just a short walk from our building. Ethan was currently in his final year of preschool. Every day, I would head down early and wait patiently in the school's reception area. I would wait for the teachers to bring the children out one by one. The school required a facial recognition scanned before they would release a child to a parent. This whole process just highlighted how irresponsible I had been as a father in the past. The housekeeper's face was already registered in the security system, but mine wasn't. If the housekeeper hadn't been there to confirm my identity with the staff, I would have had major issues. Olivia even had to provide authorization over the phone from her business trip. I wouldn't have even been allowed past the front gate otherwise. I was overwhelmed by a deep sense of shame and regret. As I watched the little guy skipping toward me with his teacher, my heart filled with a joy I couldn't describe. When Ethan realized that I was the one picking him up instead of the housekeeper, his face turned bright red with excitement. He cheered that he had seen me from across the playground. He thanked me over and over for coming to get him. I ruffled his soft hair and took his small, warm hand in mine. I told him that I would do anything he liked. I promised him that I would come to pick him up every single day from now on. He excitedly told me that he was going to tell his mother how great I was being. He said that if I kept this up, maybe his mother wouldn't feel the need to hide from me anymore. His words hit me so hard I almost started crying right there. I realized just how much I had ruined my own marriage. It was devastating that even a child could tell his mother was avoiding me on purpose. I became more and more terrified of the moment I would have to face Olivia. I wondered if she still held a grudge against me for everything I had done. I worried that she might finally decide to go through with a divorce. When we got home, Ethan ran straight to his bedroom. He had a smart camera in there that allowed him to video call his mother whenever he wanted. A few minutes later, Ethan came running back out, beaming with pride. He told me that he had just said a bunch of nice things about me to his mother. He mentioned that she actually smiled when she heard him, and he told me how beautiful she looked when she did. He said she looked just like a beautiful fairy from the stories his teachers told. I gave his chubby cheek a gentle squeeze and laughed along with him. I told him that I already knew just how beautiful she was. I told him his mother had always been as beautiful as a fairy, even when she was a little girl. Ethan looked at me and said that I also looked very handsome when I smiled. Then he flashed me a huge, toothy grin. He asked if I thought he looked cool when he smiled. He declared that everyone in our family was naturally good-looking. I agreed and told him that he was the most handsome of all, just like his mother. He seemed a bit embarrassed by the compliment. Then he tentatively asked if I would give him a bath and tuck him in since he was such a cool kid. I immediately agreed to his request. I told him it would be my pleasure. That night, I made sure to keep my promise to him. After we finished dinner, we spent some time playing games together. I led Ethan into the private bathroom attached to his room. He asked why I wasn't getting in the tub with him. I looked at the tiny child-sized bathtub and gave him a reluctant shake of my head. I told him that I was simply too big to fit in there. I explained that his bathtub was much too small for a grown man. I told him it was time to get cleaned up. I watched him happily playing with his water gun and plastic turtles in the bubbly water. I casually asked him if his mother was usually the one who gave him his baths when she was home. He confirmed that she used to, but that was back when he was a baby. He insisted that he was a big boy now and could do most of it himself. He explained that he couldn't be naked in front of his mother anymore. He told me that since she was a girl and he was a boy, they were different. It was adorable how serious he was about it. He looked up at me with a confused expression as if he couldn't believe I didn't know such a basic fact. He seemed to think it was common sense even for a child his age. He wondered how a grown man like me could be so clueless. To illustrate his point about the differences between men and women, he suddenly stood up in the middle of the bathtub. He pointed down and told me that he had a little elephant. He mentioned that his mother had told him she didn't have one. He then asked if I had one too. I let out a few awkward laughs at his innocence. I quickly sat him back down in the water and told him to stay put. I reminded him to be a good boy and finish his bath. I told him that I understood completely now. I praised him for being such a smart boy and knowing so much. He beamed with pride when he heard my compliment. Ethan sat there happily humming a little nursery rhyme to himself. Every now and then, he would grab a handful of bubbles and blow them into the air. I watched as the light bubbles drifted lazily through the room. One of the bubbles landed on a small towel hanging nearby. He seemed to remember something suddenly and pointed excitedly at the towel. He told me to take a look at it. He told me that his mother had brought that specific towel for him after her last trip. He pointed out the cute little cat paw print on the fabric. He wondered what kind of gift she would bring him when she returned the next day. He was speculating about what kind of surprise she might have for him this time. I completely tuned out the rest of his words because I was stuck on one thought. Olivia was coming home tomorrow. Early the next morning, the housekeeper was already in the kitchen busy preparing lunch. She wanted everything to be perfect since Olivia was arriving home today. The menu she was preparing was far more elaborate than our usual meals. It really hit me how cold I must have been to Olivia in the past. Everyone in the household seemed to know her schedule perfectly except for me. Everyone knew the exact day of her return, while the old version of me couldn't have cared less. To try and make amends, I decided to personally cook a dish for her. I had a vague memory of someone saying that Olivia's favorite dish was chicken soup. I specifically remembered it had to have barley and mushrooms in it. I asked the housekeeper for the exact recipe and some tips. I found a high-quality ceramic pot and started preparing the ingredients step by step. I began by simmering a whole organic chicken over low heat to create a clear, rich broth. I carefully strained the liquid to remove any impurities, leaving only the purest stock. Then, I added the barley I had soaked earlier, along with some dried cranberries for flavor. I added a few more special ingredients and let the whole thing simmer slowly. Toward the end, I added the softened mushrooms and put the lid back on to continue the slow cook. I let it cook until the mushrooms had released all of their savory flavor into the soup. Before I knew it, it was already noon, and a light drizzle had started to fall outside. The thought of picking Olivia up from the airport crossed my mind. However, I realized I had no idea what time her flight was landing or even which airport she was flying into. I didn't even know which terminal she would be arriving at. I shook my head at my own incompetence. It was frustrating to realize how little I knew about my own wife's life. The sound of Ethan giggling behind his hands brought our hug to an abrupt end. Olivia's face turned bright red all the way to her ears. She quickly turned around and hurried to the bedroom to change out of her travel clothes. I tried to act like nothing had happened and sat back down at the dining table. I started ladling the soup into bowls for everyone. Once Olivia had changed and joined us, I immediately pushed a steaming bowl of soup toward her. At the same time, I shot a desperate look at the housekeeper, pleading for some backup. The housekeeper got the hint and gave a knowing smile. She encouraged Olivia to try the soup and mentioned that I had made it specifically for her. She told her that I had spent the entire morning in the kitchen working on that single pot of soup. I felt like a puppy waiting for its owner's approval, holding my head high while being too shy to look her in the eye. My expression was a mix of pride and sheer nervousness. I desperately wanted her to say something nice, but I was too embarrassed to ask. If I had a tail, I'm sure it would have been wagging like crazy. I probably would have looked like a helicopter with how fast I'd be wagging it. Olivia gave a small smile and took a gentle sip of the soup. I couldn't tell if it was the steam or if she was actually moved, but her eyes seemed to glisten. There was a slight redness around the rims of her eyes. Ethan took a large gulp of his own and loudly declared that my soup was the best thing he had ever tasted. I thought to myself that he really was a great son. I nodded with satisfaction and ruffled his hair. A peaceful silence settled over the dining room once more. Ethan's big eyes kept darting back and forth between Olivia and me. He looked like he was deep in thought, as if he were plotting something. I had no idea what kind of mischief was brewing in his little head. Ethan finished his meal quickly, but made no move to leave the table. He was clearly stalling for time. Olivia asked him in a gentle voice if something was bothering him. She asked if there was anything else he wanted to tell her. Ethan's face turned a shy shade of pink as he looked down and started fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. He asked if he could sleep in our bed with us that night. He mentioned that all the other kids at school had slept with their parents before. He said he was the only one who had never experienced it. My heart wrenched again when I heard him say that. I realized what a terrible father I had been to let him feel so left out. Olivia gave him a warm smile and told him that we could do that once I was fully recovered. She promised him that we would let him sleep right between us very soon. She explained that she had an important meeting at the office that afternoon. She checked her watch and said it was time for her to head out. It sounded like she was giving me an explanation, but I couldn't help feeling that she was just trying to get away from me. After she left, a growing sense of anxiety began to gnaw at me. While I was looking through the walk-in closet earlier, I had stumbled upon a box. Inside were the wedding photos that I had personally torn into pieces. I began to fear that Olivia had finally reached her breaking point. I was terrified that she would serve me with divorce papers at any moment. Feeling completely lost, I decided to call Jerry once more. My voice sounded absolutely pathetic and full of despair when he answered. I asked him if he thought Olivia was really going to leave me. He let out a cold, mocking laugh over the phone. He pointed out how pathetic I sounded now compared to before. He reminded me that I was the one who had been demanding a divorce every single day. He asked why I was suddenly so scared. I was completely stunned to learn that I had been the one pushing for the split. He told me I had better figure out a way to get back into Olivia's good graces fast. He reminded me that I hadn't even stepped foot in the office in years. He added that every single cent I spent on my lifestyle was money that Olivia had earned herself. He told me that without her, I wouldn't even be able to afford a meal. I felt like crying as I realized the massive power imbalance in our relationship. The weight of it all made me start to sob. Jerry sounded completely fed up with my emotional breakdown. He asked if my brain had been replaced with mush. He reminded me that I had made her life a living hell for years. He said that if she didn't still love me, she would have kicked me to the curb a long time ago. I was completely frozen in shock. I stammered, asking if she actually loved me. He told me to stop being an idiot and said she had been crushing on me since we were kids. He called me a total blockhead for not noticing. He mocked me for always calling her my sister. He told me that she was definitely not my sister and never wanted to be. He told me that Ironically, we both owed Tiffany a debt of gratitude. He said that without her interference, things might have turned out very differently. He explained that with my denseness and Olivia's pride, we might never have ended up together. He told me I was the luckiest man alive to have stumbled into this situation. He said it was a classic case of a fool getting lucky. Then, he casually mentioned that Tiffany was getting married to that bald director this coming Saturday. The wedding was being held at the Grand Plaza. He asked if I want to go and see the spectacle. I asked him if the director wasn't already married to someone else. He told me that Tiffany had used every dramatic trick in the book to force him to leave his wife. He had heard that she even threatened to leak his dirty laundry to the tabloids if he didn't marry her. She told him that if he didn't make her his wife, she would expose all his scandals to the gossip magazines. The old man must have been terrified because he actually agreed. I told Jerry that I would definitely be there to watch the drama unfold. I wanted to see for myself what kind of spell I had been under to act so foolishly. When Saturday arrived, I felt very nervous as I told Olivia about my plans. I informed her that I was planning to attend Tiffany's wedding. I tentatively asked if she would like to accompany me. The moment Tiffany's name left my lips, the mood shifted. I caught a brief flash of pain and resignation in Olivia's eyes. I immediately rushed to explain that I wasn't going there to cause a scene. I told her I just needed to see with my own eyes how delusional I had been. I wanted to understand how I could have been so blind. Olivia looked down and gave a barely audible reply of agreement. My heart was pounding, and I wasn't sure if she actually believed me or not. I took a chance and asked her one last time if she would go with me. She declined, saying she had a very important meeting scheduled for that day. She said she had no idea how long it would last. I told her that was fine and reminded her to get some rest. Thanks to my persistent efforts to be kind and attentive lately, things between Olivia and me were finally starting to improve. At least we weren't sitting in awkward silence anymore whenever we were in the same room. But after that conversation, it felt like we had taken 2 steps back. I was kicking myself for even bringing up the wedding. I cursed under my breath, wishing I had never suggested going to that stupid event. I worried that if I suddenly changed my mind, it would make me look even more suspicious. Since my driving skills were incredibly rusty after 5 years of inactivity, I decided it wasn't safe for me to be behind the wheel. I took an Uber straight to the Grand Plaza. As soon as I walked through the doors of the banquet hall, I was met with a sight that made me cringe. There were massive wedding portraits displayed at the entrance that were absolutely hideous. The photos showed a portly, middle-aged man with a massive bald spot. Standing next to him was a woman whose face looked like it was made of plastic and filler. I felt like slapping myself for ever being attracted to her. I realized I must have been completely blind in the past. I couldn't understand how I could have ever been so obsessed with someone like that. Tiffany spotted me from across the room the moment I walked in. She immediately became defensive and hostile, like a hen protecting its nest. She demanded to know what I was doing there. She reminded me that we were over and that this was supposed to be her special day. She asked if I was there to try and win her back at the last second. I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh. I asked her if she honestly thought she was some kind of prize made of gold or diamonds. I told her there was no way I would ever want to go back to her. I said I should actually thank her for not marrying me. If she had, I never would have realized how perfect my life could be with my real wife. She called me a lunatic and told me to leave if I was having another episode. She screamed to me to get back to the psychiatric ward where I belonged. She told me to stop making a fool of myself at her wedding. She bragged that her husband was a famous and highly successful director in the industry. She claimed he could crush me like a bug without even trying. I dared her to call him over so I could see him try. Before I could even finish my sentence, the bald man waddled over, surrounded by a group of sycophants. He asked Tiffany who I was supposed to be. One of his followers immediately chimed in to answer for her. He told Director Wilson that I was the pathetic loser who had been stalking Tiffany for years. He laughed and said I was the weirdo who had a total breakdown and ended up in a mental hospital. Wilson smirked and said he finally recognized the famous lunatic everyone was talking about. He mockingly asked if the hospital was having an open door day. He asked if I was finally cured of my delusions. He made a point of criticizing my appearance, calling me a total cheapskate. He claimed he had seen me arrive in a cheap Uber. He mocked me for being my age and still not even owning a car. He called me an absolute loser in front of everyone. Someone mentioned that I used to be a top student in college. They joked that I must have studied so much that I lost my mind. They said that while mental illness might be treatable, being poor was a terminal condition. They suggested that I was only there to pretend I was someone important. They joked that I probably thought acting tough would fix my broken brain. The whole group erupted into mean-spirited laughter at my expense. They were clearly trying to embarrass me and make me look small. I just gave them a thin smile and decided not to waste any more words on them. I calmly picked up a glass of champagne from a nearby tray. I told them my life was going great and that they didn't need to worry about me. I suggested that they should all go to the doctor and get their noses checked. I told them they needed to fix whatever was wrong with their sense of smell. I remarked that they looked like human beings, but couldn't seem to tell the difference between something valuable and something trashy. Wilson told me to keep acting tough while I could. He bet that I didn't even have $200 in my pocket right now. He laughed and said the only thing strong about me was my attitude. He told me that if I got on my knees right then, he might show some mercy. They suggested I should bow down to Director Wilson and beg for help. They joked that if he was in a good mood, he might give me enough money to keep a beggar like me fed for months. Wilson agreed, saying that if I apologized properly, he would be generous. He offered to let me hand out lunchboxes on his film sets for a small monthly wage. He thought he was being incredibly kind. As soon as the bald man finished speaking, his followers started sucking up to him again. One particularly annoying guy started loudly praising Tiffany for her choices. He said that dumping me was the smartest thing she ever did because it led her to a great man like Wilson. I just looked at the guy as if he were the biggest idiot on the planet. I told them they really didn't need to worry about my finances. I casually mentioned that my wife made more than enough money to support me comfortably. They immediately started mocking me for being a deadbeat who lived off a woman. One of them started to say something incredibly offensive about my wife's profession. Before he could finish his insult, a sweet, clear voice called out, "Honey." The voice cut him off instantly, and every head in the room turned toward the entrance. A woman with ethereal beauty and incredible poise was standing at the doors of the banquet hall. It was Olivia Montgomery. As the room filled with whispers of people wondering who this stunning woman was, I quickly made my way over to her. I gallantly offered my arm for her to hold. She was wearing a breathtaking, floor-length red gown with a high slit. The custom tailoring was perfect, highlighting her flawless figure in the most elegant way possible. The vibrant red of the dress made her fair skin look like pure porcelain. She was wearing a pair of delicate designer heels that made her look even taller and more graceful. She completely commanded the room with her presence. As I approached, she gave me a dazzling smile that could melt anyone's heart. She gracefully looped her arm through mine and called me honey in a voice as sweet as honey. The entire room went dead silent in an instant. Even the arrogant Director Wilson completely forgot about his new bride, Tiffany, as he stared at Olivia. He practically stumbled over himself as he rushed over to try and introduce himself to her. He even tried to smooth down the few strands of hair left on his head and nervously adjusted his tie. He introduced himself as a famous director from a major production company. He asked if she had any interest in becoming a movie star. He promised that with a single word from her, he could make her the biggest star in the world. She coolly replied that she had absolutely no interest in such things. Then, she turned to me and thanked me. She remarked that the air in the room felt stifling and unpleasant. She suggested that we should just head back home. I eagerly agreed, as I had been wanting to leave for a long time. My only reason for coming today was to finally put my past mistakes behind me for good. The bald director was still trying to follow us, begging her to reconsider his offer. He shouted that I was nothing but a broke loser with no future. He claimed that I was mentally unstable and shouldn't be trusted. He warned her not to let my good looks deceive her. He insisted that I had absolutely nothing to offer except for a handsome face. Olivia turned back and gave him a stunning smile that took everyone's breath away. She told him that his face happened to be exactly what she liked. She said she was more than happy to support me and that it was none of his business. Right as she finished speaking, a rare, limited edition luxury car pulled up smoothly at the entrance. Our driver jumped out and hurried over to hold the door open for us with total respect. He invited us both to get into the car. We left behind a room full of people who looked like they had just swallowed something disgusting. We made a grand exit while everyone else watched in total disbelief. As soon as the doors closed, I grabbed Olivia's hand and refused to let go. We were finally alone in the back of the car. The driver discreetly raised the privacy glass between the front and back seats. I was desperate to come clean and tell Olivia everything. I started to call her name. Before I could say another word, Olivia interrupted me with tears in her eyes. She told me firmly that she was never going to agree to a divorce. She told me to give up on that idea immediately. I was completely caught off guard. I told her that I didn't want a divorce at all and that I would never leave her. I told her that even if she tried to throw me out with a broom, I wouldn't budge. Now, it was Olivia's turn to be speechless. A single tear was frozen on her cheek as she stared at me. I reached out and gently wiped the tear away from her face. I began to slowly explain everything that had happened to me. After hearing my story, Olivia sat in stunned silence for a long time. She remarked that it finally explained why I had been acting like a completely different person. She admitted that she liked this version of me much better than the old one. I reached out and pulled her into a warm, tight embrace. I was hugging her for both the man I was now and the man I used to be. I whispered a sincere apology directly into her ear. After that day, our lives together became absolutely perfect. Every day we spent together was happier than the last. Olivia made a conscious effort to cut back on her working hours. She started spending much more of her time with Ethan and me. Someone still had to keep the company running smoothly. I stepped up and started taking on more responsibility in the business. Then, one day, something interesting happened. I was busy helping Olivia organize some highly confidential files for an upcoming meeting. Suddenly, I heard a loud commotion coming from the reception area outside. A man was shouting that he had a prearranged appointment with the CEO's wife. He claimed to be a high-level representative from a major film studio. He insisted he was there to discuss a massive business opportunity. The receptionist politely told him that she wasn't available to see anyone right now. He demanded that she call in and announce his arrival. He kept insisting that he really did have an appointment. He claimed his proposal was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the company. He shouted that it was a multi-million-dollar production. He threatened the receptionist, asking if she could really handle the consequences of turning him away. The poor girl was clearly flustered and didn't know what to do. I frowned and walked out to see who was making all that noise. I was surprised to see the same bald director who was with Tiffany. As soon as he saw me, his face twisted into a smug, arrogant grin. He mocked me, asking if I had given up my life as a kept man. He asked if I was now working as a lowly errand boy. He bragged that he was personally acquainted with the owner of the company. He told me that if I could get my wife to have dinner with him to close the deal, he might help me out. He said he would consider putting a good word for me with the CEO. The young receptionist was absolutely horrified by his shameless behavior. It took her a moment to find her voice, and then she quickly addressed me as Mr. Lucas. She told me she would call security to have the lunatic removed immediately. I had actually heard rumors that a struggling film studio was desperately looking for investors lately. I had even considered setting aside some extra capital to test the waters with a film project. However, now that I saw who was behind it, I immediately changed my mind. I dropped the idea instantly. Investing in a guy like him would be like throwing money down a drain. I coldly told the receptionist to go ahead and call security before turning to walk away. He shouted after me, asking why I was leaving. He complained about the lack of hospitality for such an important guest. He kept yelling that he was a personal guest of the CEO. The security guards didn't hold back as they hauled the bald man out of the building. As they dragged him away, they told him to stop pretending to be someone important. They asked him how he could claim to know the CEO without knowing her own husband. The hallway finally became quiet again. Later, the The receptionist told me some gossip about how the film project had completely collapsed because they couldn't find any investors. The production was shut down, and the ball director was fired from his studio. As soon as Tiffany realized the old man was broke and jobless, she dumped him without a second thought. She had already moved on and found herself a wealthy local businessman to cling to. Honestly, whatever happened to those two didn't matter to me at all anymore. I was no longer the pushover I used to be. By the time Ethan started first grade, Olivia was pregnant with our second child. We went to the hospital for a detailed ultrasound to check on the baby. The doctor surprised us with the news that we were actually having twins. To make sure Olivia was well supported, I decided to hire an additional experienced nanny to help around the house. I wanted someone dedicated to looking after Olivia's needs and ensuring the health of the twins. I have no idea how Tiffany managed to find out about our situation. She actually had the nerve to apply for the position through the domestic agency we were using. When I saw her again, her face was weathered and she looked incredibly exhausted. She looked at least 10 years older than she actually was. I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy for her, only a deep sense of disgust. She even tried to come closer and act familiar with me, but I quickly stepped back and blocked her. I told her to get out and stay away from my family forever. I signaled for the security guards to remove the woman from the premises immediately. Little Ethan mimicked my tone and agreed with me. I told him it was nothing to worry about, just a confused woman who had wandered in. I assured him that security had already taken care of it. Seeing that Olivia and Ethan were both wide awake now, we decided to head over to the sunroom. We sat down together and just enjoyed each other's company. Olivia gently rubbed her growing belly and asked if I thought we were having boys or girls. She wondered if we might be lucky enough to have one of each. I told her that it didn't matter to me at all because I would love them regardless. I promised that any child she gave me would be my greatest treasure. Then I asked Ethan if he was hoping for a brother or a sister. He said he was being greedy and wanted one of each. He imagined playing soccer with a little brother and me. He thought a little sister would be perfect to go shopping for pretty clothes with his mother. He laughed and said that way, no one in the family would ever be lonely. I sat there quietly, watching the two of them as they were bathed in the warm afternoon sunlight. They seemed to be glowing with a soft, peaceful light. I couldn't help but marvel how incredibly lucky I had been in this life. I had become the ultimate winner with these two priceless people by my side. Actually, I corrected myself. Counting the two little ones on the way, I was about to have 4 treasures in my life. I knew that our future would be as bright and beautiful as the sunlight filling the room. A deep sense of happiness flowed through the air along with the sound of our laughter. Everything about this moment was absolutely perfect and beyond reproach. That Lucas's journey reminds us that while we cannot go back to fix a broken beginning, we can start exactly where we are to create a brand new ending by choosing presence over obsession and humility over ego. True happiness isn't found in chasing a distant mirage, but in the quiet courage to cherish the love that has been standing by us all along. It is never too late to wake up and become the person your loved ones deserve.